An Archaeodeath TikTok Live with Professor Howard Williams discussing archaeology and heritage in Gaza.
Okay, it's a serious topic. So what I want to talk about is what's going on in Gaza in relation to cultural heritage and all manner of aspects relating to that. And there's the first point is that, another article released in the Jordan Times only yesterday. A week ago, 6th of August, by Sophie Constantine, called Cultural Damage Assessment in War-Torn Gaza. And it says that in Amman, amidst the unfolding tragedy in Gaza, international organisations have released detailed reports on the deliberate destruction of Palestinian cultural heritage by forces. Cultural heritage encompasses archaeological sites, historical monuments, artefacts, archives and museums, which are all valuable for their historical, scientific, aesthetic and religious and architectural significance. These elements serve as symbols of collective identities and therefore are tangible links to the past. Salah Hodeli, an archaeologist resident in the West Bank, has been vocal about the cultural devastation and antiquities looting on independent digital media, Sapiens, criticising the silence and lack of intervention from organisations tasked with protecting cultural heritage. As the Secretary General of the International Council of Monuments and Sites from Palestine, that's ICMOS, he acknowledges the challenges of preserving historical sites during wartime, but insists that organisations like UNESCO possess tools and tactics to mitigate such destruction. Palestinian Ministry of Culture has reported that 207 out of 320 heritage buildings and sites have been reduced to rubble or severely damaged. This preliminary assessment based on local witnesses, international NGOs and satellite imagery underscores the profound loss suffered by the Palestinian people of Gaza. Now I just want to break down. I want to actually read this out and then reflect on each individual article. Churches. One of the most significant losses is the Orthodox Church of St. Porphyrius, one of the world believed to be the world's third oldest church. An airstrike on October 2023 resulted to the death of at least 18 Christian Palestinians sheltering there. The Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem condemned the attack, describing it as a war crime and accusing the military of targeting churches and civilian shelters. The Church of St. Porphyrius, named after the 5th century bishop of Gaza, contains his tomb and is located in the Zaytun district, one of the oldest in Gaza. Built in AD or CE 425, the church is considered one of the oldest archaeological churches in Gaza, featuring a large hall with the ceiling covered by intersecting vaults shaped like a cross, supported by stone columns. The church's walls, made of solid stone, approximately 80 centimetres thick, have been a significant cultural and religious landmark, according to the Arab regional group of ICMOS. Other Christian sites have also suffered damage. The Jabalia Byzantine Church faced complete destruction due to direct shelling, while the St. Hilarion Monastery suffered partial damage from indirect shelling, as reported by the NGO Heritage for Peace. Now, none of this is new, but this is a recent article synopsising 10 months of activity. Right, we move on to the next section, which is called mosques. According to Middle East Monitor, 1,000 out of 1,200 mosques in Gaza have been destroyed. The core of Gaza's old city, home to 144 prominent historical monuments, have been relentlessly devastated. Among those is the Great Amari Mosque, originally the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, built by the Crusaders in the 12th century, converted to a mosque by Salah al-Din in 1187, according to the Institute for Palestine Studies. The Amari Mosque, one of the most significant and largest historical mosques in Palestine, was known for its basilica architecture, marble columns, inscriptions dating back to the Mamluk and Ottoman eras. The mosque's library housed a collection of 62 rare manuscripts, including historical copies of the Quran and ancient books on philosophy and Sufi mysticism, explained the Museum Association in a statement. The mosque suffered partial damage from indirect shelling, as reported by Heritage for Peace. Meanwhile, other mosques, such as Sheikh Shaban Mosque or Zafari Damar Mosque, have been completely destroyed by direct shelling. The Ibn Uthman Mosque in the my pronunciation is rubbish, so forgive me. The Shujaiyah district dates back to the 15th century and served as the burial site for the Prophet Muhammad's great-great-great-grandfather Hashem. Has also been severely damaged, according to the Institute for Palestine Studies. Next section is museum and cultural centres. Gaza's museums and cultural centres have not been spared from the bombardment. Among them, the Rafah Museum, recently opened museum dedicated to Palestinian heritage, was partially destroyed by an airstrike. The Qawara Museum, which housed over 3,000 relics, artefacts dating back to the Bronze Age, also suffered serious damage along with its collection of Byzantine pottery. Another museum, Al-Mathaf, founded by Qatat Qadari was a prospective national museum, was bombed, devastating its contents, as reported by Heritage for Peace. Additionally, am I frozen? Oh, I'm back. And additionally, the Rasad Shoah Cultural Centre in Gaza City, a contemporary architectural landmark designed by Saad Mahfouz and opened and completed in 1988, was damaged. The centre, located in the Rimal neighbourhood, was the first cultural centre built in Palestine aimed to end the cultural isolation experienced by Palestinians. Palaces. The Pasha's Palace, a former governor's residence during the Mamluk and Ottoman eras, was renovated and converted into an archaeological museum in recent years. Known as Qazi Basha, this 13th century palace in Gaza City has suffered damage to its walls, courtyard and gardens following a December airstrike by forces. The palace is a notable example of Islamic architecture, located in the Daraj neighbourhood on the eastern side of the old town, an area rich in historical buildings that showcase Gaza's extensive heritage. The palace was transformed into a museum by the Ministry of Tourism in early 2010 and has suffered partial damage from indirect shelling. The article concludes, the list of heritage sites mentioned above is not exhaustive. As of the 10th of June, UNESCO has verified damage to 50 sites since October the 7th, 11 religious sites, 28 historical buildings and of artistic interest, 2 depositories of movable cultural property, 4 museums, a museum and 4 archaeological sites in the Gaza Strip. UNESCO is currently conducting a damage assessment of the cultural properties through remote monitoring based in satellite imagery, as on-the-ground assessments are impossible in the current situation, according to the UNESCO system statement. So, right, let me just synopsize what the key point is, right? So it's not, as I said yesterday in the live on Soraya's channel, there's no doubting that human lives matter more than cultural heritage. But as an expert in archaeological monuments and cultural heritage, it's very important we recognise that this is a systematic dimension of this asymmetrical warfare that is going to have a deep time impact and is a strategy of genocide, because what it's doing is eradicating the cultural heritage, not of one specific ethnic or religious group, but of any groups that have inhabited or participated in that region, right the way from the Neolithic Bronze Age through to the British occupation and the founding of the modern state of Israel. So we see this is an area where we are seeing the not only the systematic, militarized containment and control of that population in an open air penitentiary in an orbit name, but we are also seeing the systematic destruction of those cultural heritage assets. It's what we call in the West a cultural heritage asset. I hate this terminology. Like people talk about the experience of visitor sites being a heritage offer. It makes me vomit, but these are the terms we use, right? But it's important to frame it this way, because this is the stuff that matters. This is the stuff that shouldn't matter more than people's lives, but this is the stuff that will should upset for people who claim to be interested in cultural heritage and the preservation of Christian, Jewish, Muslim sites, as well as sites from before all those world religions, and the future of the importance of this cultural heritage for the people as reconstruction takes place is really important. Okay, so that's my opening introduction to you. I know that most people don't listen anyway in these lives because you're here just to leave some comment of your own, but can I just see if there's any actual comments on that article, which was published, just to repeat it, in the Jordan Times on the 6th of August by Sophie Constantine. So is there any questions about the contents of that piece before I move on? Yes, I did see the news about Stonehenge, but tonight's live is about Palestine. Thank you for joining. All right, tonight's live is about Palestine, as I said. So I'm not talking about... All right, tonight's live is about Palestine, as I said. So I'm not talking about Rendlesham in a live about Palestine, because Rendlesham is, the last time I looked, in Suffolk, not in the Eastern Mediterranean. It's heartbreaking, yes, and it's not going to be over, because we're going to see months and months more of this, if not years. But it's important to keep this conversation alive, because the second a tiny stone is moved or a tree is cut down on a British heritage site, it's headline news. But this is an ongoing systematic destruction of cultural heritage that is, at one level, we can say, oh, it's of that particular people. But like all heritage that's under the ICOMOS or UNESCO frameworks, this is of international global importance. And this region, you have to remember, this region is absolutely tied into the story of Britain. You know, you cannot understand modern Britain without understanding the military, cultural, colonial, imperial connections with that region. And you can't disconnect it. And I would imagine that most British and Irish, Scottish, English, Welsh, as you know, within the British rubric, peoples, Manx people, have 1 or 2 steps connection with that region. And don't pretend otherwise. My grandfather fought in this region in the First World War. You know, not in Gaza, but you know, but my point is, everyone's got a family story. Everyone's got a connection. So this is very important for all our cultural heritage and thinking about, you know, the future. And if we get upset by the occasional deliberate performed, fundamentalist, extremist eradication of cultural assets, which has happened. It's not one group in that region destroying old shit. It's lots of people are doing this for different motivations over the decades. If we've seen the systematic destruction in Syria, we see that this is about, this is going to be, it isn't destruction of simply cultural materials of value for the past. This is destroying future revenue streams. If you want to see it in economic terms, heritage tourism is a massive potential heritage tourism draw. And if those monuments aren't there, the tourists of 2040 or 2060 are not going to be going. This is about systematic destruction of I know it's not about revenue, but I'm just trying to give you different ways of looking at this. Okay. So I hope that's of use as a first point. So that was about the Jordan Times piece. There's also an ongoing story which ArcheoSoup has talked about, which is the Netanyahu coalition have advanced a bill to allow Israel's Antiquities authorities to operate in the West Bank. And that's really interesting. And that was published in Haaretz by Noah Shibigil and Nir Hansen on July the 8th. I don't know whether this will actually go forward, because I think it's knocked off the Israeli military. Because at one level, the Israel Antiquities Authority is like the state archaeological and heritage service that see for the conservation and preservation, but also the investigation of archaeological sites. They are a massive soft propaganda mechanism for the Israeli state, but they also find some amazing cool stuff and they preserve some cool stuff. And until now, they haven't been allowed to operate in the West Bank because it is treated as a separate military-controlled district. And it's if you go and watch the YouTube video by the Watching Brief on ArcheoSoup's YouTube channel, he addresses this, and Andy Brockman, his partner in archaeology heritage discussions, has a really good discussion of that. Now, I don't know the latest about that, but what it's important to signal is that ever since the foundation of Israel, but also moving forward into the right up to the present day, heritage tourism, cultural tourism, pilgrimage, and the careful investigation, conservation, management, display of antiquities in Israel has been absolutely fundamental to state building, national identity, and Zionist discourse, but also its international projection of identity. When you go into Ben Gurion Airport, the first piece of cultural heritage you get to see, just as you, as an international visitor, exit from the airport, is a huge mosaic, Roman period mosaic, excavated in what is now northern Palestine, and carefully conserved and displayed. So all visitors get a Roman angle to Israel, the main international airport. And throughout the airport, there are displays of cultural heritage as an integral part, deep time story, Bronze Age sites, Jericho, right the way through. And of course, this is a story of remembering and forgetting, because of course you will struggle to find direct and detailed discussions of the 1,000 years of Islamic culture and society in that region as part of the story. And so I've been to archaeological sites in that region where you get the Canaanite levels, with all these different sort of biblical terms evoked, and all these different the Roman, the Byzantine period, and then and there's like 1,000 years of Fatimid and on top, but that's not included in the discussion. So the control of the West Bank's heritage under the Israeli Antiquities Authority is a really far right move to try and another strategy of absorbing the West Bank into the state. And whether this particular bill goes through or not, it shows those long-term aspirations to, part of the land claiming, part of the land taking is telling the story of that land, conserving the monuments of that land. So it's an integral part. Yeah, Baylor of the Evil Eye said it. The cultural destruction is an integral part of the genocide. But this is the flip side, is that the cultural management and control of the heritage interpretation is the flip side, right? So there's two sides to these narratives. It's not just about militarized destruction, which you can always say, it was by accident. Yeah, well, some of it is probably, but others are very much about selective control and selective remembering. So I thought I'd talk about that point. So they're the two sides of any state-led nationalistic archaeology, or colonial archaeology, if you like. It's about what stories you tell, what monuments you investigate, conserve, who does that management, and then what monuments do you let get bulldozed or carpet bombed or strategically bombed. Okay. There's another story about, the third story I was going to talk about was the 4th century monastery of St. Hilarion, which is rapidly deteriorating in its situation, but that article is now behind a paywall in the arts newspaper, I think. I'm going to see if I can get it. It's subscriber only. I hadn't realized, but there's a discussion of individual sites there. But one of the other pieces I did want to talk about, and this is perhaps the third and final piece I'll talk about, is yes, ideological motivations are not one side of the equation. I wouldn't claim it would be. But this third story is much more personalised, and it was published by Nesreen Malik on the 2nd of August in The Guardian, and it's called The Gaza Archeologist. Inflation is 500% and the tents are like an oven. And it's about Fidel Al-Atul, who's a 43-year-old archaeologist and restoration specialist who works in Gaza. And we've got to remember that, as I said in the live yesterday, that there's obviously the broader humanitarian crisis, there's the cultural heritage being destroyed, but the third aspect is, of course, the teachers, the academics, the universities, the researchers, the conservation of these sites. These are people caught up in this, and my union, University College Union, has been making sustained public statements about in solidarity against the impact on long-term education, because if we don't have education system structures in place for any population, this is condemning generations to inability to access quality education and so on, and just really shattering to see this piece. It's kind of a little question and answer, so I'd like to read it out. Tell me about your archaeological work and career in Gaza. And he says, I'm a specialist in archaeological restoration and excavation. I began my work in 1995 with the École Biblique as part of the agreement between France and the Palestinian National Authority. I've also worked with UNESCO and the British Council on projects to uncover and preserve historical sites. Next question. What was the status of your work and the projects when the war started? I was working for an organisation that protects heritage in areas of conflict, that mentors, trains and employs graduates in archaeology from universities in Gaza. We train them for 3 months and then choose the best. we would target about 50 students. Then, according to our budget, we'd employ up to 20 of them. It was a British Council operation in conjunction with the International Alliance on the Protection of Heritage in Conflict Areas, Aleph Foundation. And since 2017, I have been the First Aid Vision 2030, which supports I've been with the First Aid Vision 2030, which supports archaeological fieldwork. The archaeological sector, unfortunately, did not have a lot of domestic support in Gaza. We had a government department, but as you can imagine, archaeology was not going to be more important than health or education. Well, that's true of anywhere in the world, but, it's still important. So that's my interjection. That's not what they say. So the government leaned on international support. Third question, how have this work and heritage sites been affected? Gaza was the location of some very important cultural and archaeological sites. The last project we worked on was a Roman era cemetery. We found for the first time coffins made of lead decorated with vine leaves from the 1st century AD. The size and number of the graves indicate that there was a Roman city in the south of the cemetery, to the south of the cemetery. This was a very important discovery. Right before the war, we were preparing for the site for 3D photographic mapping. The site is now destroyed. So in addition to the built heritage, this brings to mind that it's the below ground archaeology that's being decimated too, whether it's by bombing or it's by tank or heavy armoured personnel carrier movements, the creation of new roads, new cleared zones for military, control. All of that is part of the damage. I'm very, very sad about what has happened to archaeological sites and heritage in Gaza. I did not cry over my own house that was struck in an air raid. Like the rest of the houses, it is gone. But then I saw the Great Amari Mosque was struck. I saw Gaza al-Basha, a museum and historical building, was also struck. These were deliberate strikes. Afterwards, bulldozers were used. It is an extremely sad state of affairs. I feel this war has burned human stones and trees. Nothing is left of Gaza and the city's beauty. These sites and historical buildings, how were they dispersed? They were all over Gaza, but the mosques and churches were in old Gaza city. The Byzantine church in Jabalia, for example, was struck directly. We had, in conjunction with the British Council, erected beautiful and effective protective structures around this church that were in keeping with the style of its 6th century. 6th century! Do you know how many standing 6th century churches we have in Britain, ladies and gentlemen? Go on, in the island of Britain, how many extant 6th century churches do we have? I'll tell you, none. We have none. Right, anyway, let me get back to the point. They were all over Gaza. We had effective protective structures around this church that were in keeping with the style of its 6th century design. We lined protections along the corridors and the beautiful, delicate mosaics. It is very sad. These important historical locations are in Jabalia, the old city in the northwest, and there are others in Khan Yunis, Rafah. Thank God, unfortunately, nothing has been lost in Nuseirat so far. I don't know how to say all the place names. Sorry, I'm useless. 3 final questions. Where were you when the war started? I was on an archaeological excavation on the Roman cemetery site in the north of Gaza City. Me and my team of excavators and students left 20 minutes before the war started. It was a very, very difficult time for me. We had to leave the site and our homes and move to the south. It was a miracle that I managed to leave. It was a very sensitive area. There were lots of strikes and phosphorus bombs. The war started on the 7th of October. We made it out on the 8th, just before midnight. We went first to Nuseirat and sought shelter in an Umrah school, then moved to Rafah. Then, when the ground operation started, we moved again to Deir al-Balah. We are trying to find a safe space, but there isn't a single safe area in all of Gaza. Penultimate question, what is your life like now? Imagine you were living in a house and then you were living in a tent. Life has shrunk. Now I spend my time searching for everything for my family. We are running out of water, trying to charge your phone, looking for solar power, then polluted water makes you sick. The inflation is 400 to 500%, and now it's July, so it's very hot. The tents are plastic, so as if you were boiling in an oven. My eldest son also helps, but if there's something a bit far away that needs to be brought, I do it because I am older and can figure out if things get risky. And then you hear that there is someone nearby who was wanted by Israel, and so the area is struck. These are massive bombs. The sound and shaking of the ground puts you in a state of horror. It's something you do not even see in Hollywood movies, not even in your imagination. We left our homes with nothing, thinking we would be back in days. I left in a t-shirt and trousers. Me and the whole family have nothing to do with political or military affairs. I am a civilian who wants to live a cultural and humanitarian life. Why are they punishing me? Final question. Has any information reached you about the status of sites and historical buildings since the start of the war? The team that works for me remains in Gaza. Whenever the army leaves an area, the team takes pictures and sends them to me whenever they find an internet connection. I document the extent of the destruction and keep track. The war will end one day, all wars end, and we will build Gaza back into a place that is even more beautiful than it was before. Okay, so, I mean, you can read this yourself, but I thought this would be a fitting moment to recognise the broader level of cultural destruction with the first article of the Jordan Times, followed up by a discussion of the plans to make heritage protection conservation investigation by the Israel Antiquities Authority expanded into the West Bank. Whether that happens or not, we shall see. And then thirdly, with a personal experience in the garden of Fadel al-Atul, who is an archaeologist and restoration specialist working in Gaza. Take care, everyone, and see you soon.
For relaxing times, make it Archaeodeath time.